Thank you. Thank you very much, Rafa, for the introduction, and also thank you to One Oceans for the invitation to be here, and congratulations on the event that has been organized to celebrate World Ocean Day, and also the choice of venue in business and management school, Bocconi, one of the top in the world. So I think really brings the conversation to where it should be, which is how to create a new economy that is about investing in nature rather than take from nature. So this is what we're going to try to do today. And in fact, I'm very happy to see the conversation being raised to business schools and hallmarks of economy. And Ralph and I were presenting 2 weeks ago in the European Central Bank to the board, the councillors to the board, and the president of the bank. And just today in the Financial Times, there is a note from the European Central Bank on the importance of investing in nature. So this blue economy is slowly surfacing back to a level of conversation where the private sector can engage. And what I'm going to do in this duo presentation that my colleague and friend Ralph Chami and I will do together is first to walk you through the concept of blue natural capital in the context of nature-based solutions. And then Ralph will tell you how we can create an economy around investing in nature. There's been a lot of conversation already about natural capital and nature-based solutions in the meeting today. And also then we heard from Her Excellency, the Minister of the Marshall Islands, on the importance of the oceans for our own existence. So the benefits we receive from the oceans are many, and none as important as climate stability. So this is not shifting. Oh, there. So climate stability in the Earth system used to be maintained during thousands of years through a closed loop called the global carbon cycle. And the global carbon cycle is a closed loop through which organisms, both on land and ocean, remove carbon through photosynthesis mainly, not only, but through photosynthesis. And they remove about 780 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year, which is more than 10 times the amount that is emitted by human sources. And then that material that is generated from photosynthesis then is able to support all of the processes in ecosystems, reproduction, growth, movement, and eventually organisms, both on land and oceans, then take the energy that is contained in this organic material and release it back to use it to support their metabolism and energetic needs through the process of respiration. And then respiration returns back that carbon as carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And the balance between those two processes, photosynthesis and respiration at the global scale, is so well tuned that we can really resolve it by measurements if there is any difference between the two, and we can use models to see if there is a slight little offset between one or the other component that also drive small oscillations in carbon dioxide. But this circular economy of carbon that has been maintained over tens of thousands of years by biology is really what maintains climatic stability and is driven by natural capital. So natural capital is defined as the components of ecosystems, be it species or habitats or communities, that support the processes that are essential to maintain human well-being, and none of them is as important as we're seeing now as climatic stability. So if we simplify the goals of the Paris Agreement, in Article 4, Paris Agreement pledges to achieve by mid-century an equilibrium between emissions of greenhouse gases and removal by sinks. So really what the Paris Agreement is about is to return human operations to be under the laws of nature. So we're going to generate a circular economy of carbon or greenhouse gases that is going to stabilize their concentration in the atmosphere. And that seems to be a very good idea. So how do we do that? So there are multiple options to do that, and there's basically two domains where we can intervene. This is a model that my colleague Bill McDonough and I produced for the G20 a few years ago. And really we have two areas of activity. One is the technosphere, which is the domain of human-built structures and materials, and the other one is the biosphere. So we can reduce emissions by energy efficiency or by switching to renewables. We can also reuse and recycle greenhouse gases to produce other materials, but we also need to remove. We need to remove excess carbon dioxide that is already present in the atmosphere, and we can do it in two different ways. We can use it in the technosphere by using machines that remove carbon dioxide, or we can use it in nature. So that's in the left part of the figure, remove, and that's what we call nature-based solutions for climate change. So usually there is a blue and a brown component in the remove part. So if we then zoom on this component of climate action, which is nature-based solutions, then the way we define nature-based solutions is as an approach to decarbonize the atmosphere, so remove excess carbon from the atmosphere, to recarbonize the biosphere. Because as mentioned earlier by Dr. Sylvia Earle, we have lost about half of the global natural capital, both on land and the ocean, that was supporting all of this work and the carbon cycle that maintain climatic stability. So we need to recover and restore ecosystems and functions both on land and ocean. So nature-based solutions actually aim at rebuilding the abundance of life on land and oceans, and therefore to restore and regenerate the natural capital upon which our well-being depends. So what is the scope for nature-based solutions? And almost in an ongoing basis, I found that when there's a forum where climate change is being discussed, the conversation rapidly goes into fossil fuel use. That's a big part of the problem, but not the only component of the problem. And about 38% of accumulated greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere that are creating the problem actually do not come from emissions from greenhouse gas combustion or cement production. They actually come from destroying nature. And in carbon accounting, this has the very weird name of land use change. And that name is weird because it's not about land alone. We have also destroyed and damaged marine ecosystems. So it shouldn't be land use change, it should be biosphere change. So here we need to claim the oceans into that language as well. And if we look at the scope for nature-based solutions, so even in 2022, when we have the last carbon budget available, then 24% of emissions were not from from fossil fuels. They were from damages to ecosystems and nature. So it follows that if 1/3 of the problem comes from damaging nature, if we repair nature, we can actually achieve 1/3 of the climate action that we need. And that comes along with many benefits. But as I mentioned, the focus has been for many decades on forest and on land. And now we learn that there's a lot of opportunities to contribute to climate action through a blue natural capital in the ocean. So marine forest, that would be like seagrass, mangroves, and salt marshes, and kelp forests, are the most intense carbon sinks in the biosphere. So based on research that myself and others did in the 90s and early part of the century, then in 2009, I worked together with different agencies of the UN to publish a report where we calculated the benefit of conserving and restoring marine forest to climate action. And in fact, if we compare the champion of carbon removal on land, that will be the pristine Amazonian forest, with the champion of carbon removal in the ocean, which is your Posidonia meadows in the Mediterranean, it follows that 1 hectare of Posidonia meadow in the Mediterranean is actually equivalent to about 17 hectares of pristine Amazonian forest in terms of the capacity to remove carbon. And there's one important difference between the two, an important difference which I found when I was working early on this opportunity that people on land were not really grasping, is that there are no fires underwater. So the carbon that these ecosystems accumulate safely over thousands of years without going through the natural cycles of burning and returning to the atmosphere, which have been now accelerated by climate change-induced forest fires. So these grasses that we see in the photo, and that's in Spain, but you have beautiful Posidonia meadows in Sardinia, for instance, I was mentioned earlier, are really champions of climate action that we can look at in terms of catalyzing our activity. But sadly, we have also lost about half of the global extent of seagrass, mangroves, and kelp forest, and salt marshes. So in 2009, as I mentioned, I worked together with different UN agencies to release this report called Blue Carbon, the role of healthy oceans in binding carbon, where we put forward the strategy to contribute to climate action by avoiding future losses through conservation and also restoring these ecosystems. This is the first time that this term blue carbon was used, and since it has become a mainstream focus of research and now also on investments. So on the Paris Agreement, the major investment on blue carbon was announced at that time, 2015, by the French government, and there was a $70 million investment in mangrove restoration in the Philippines. Every convention of the parties, every year, the number grows, and the largest blue carbon projects now on the ground are in the order of more than $5 billion single projects. So from 2015 to now we've seen a 100 to approaching 1,000-fold increase in the investment in blue carbon, because it's a strategy that works and it's a strategy that generates multiple benefits. So what are those benefits? So in addition to climate action, these ecosystems also help protect our shorelines. So they are very important to defend infrastructure, human lives, and also the beaches upon which, for instance, tourism depend. So we can actually also achieve climate change adaptation. They also support fisheries. They improve the sanitation of waters and reduce enteric diseases that kill millions of children every year in developing nations because they keep the pathogens away from the water. They contribute to zero hunger because they promote fisheries, partnerships, many SDGs that are supported by blue carbon strategies, and therefore there are no regret action. Whereas, for instance, if you remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere with the same amount with a machine, you actually remove carbon dioxide, then you need to find what to do with it, because it's still carbon dioxide, so the problem is not removed. But if you remove it with nature, then what you get is more nature, which actually reproduces itself, and you get all of these benefits in addition. So let's talk a bit about food security, because that's a very important sustainable development goal. So in 2005, there were about 8,000 million people which were undernourished and at risk of dying from hunger. And between then and 2015, progress was made, and the global population at risk of hunger was reduced by about 30%. But unfortunately, due to disruptions such as energy price, war in Ukraine, and more recently now climate disturbances with droughts and floods, then the number of people at risk of severe undernourishment is actually greater than in 2005. So if we fail to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 2, none of the others matter. Because without nourishment, you cannot support education, health, and any of the other goals. So this is a fundamental failure of our approach to Sustainable Development Goals. And the link between this and blue carbon is the production of marine food. And I refer often to blue superfoods, because marine food is food that is healthy for us, can be healthy for the planet, and affordable. So we need foods with very low carbon footprints and very low water footprints, and those can only come from the ocean. So when you restore mangrove, restore Posidonia meadows, you're also contributing to alleviate hunger by enhancing the capacity of nature to produce food. But the most important development of blue carbon is that for the first time, nature, marine ecosystems are investable without having to extract from them. So during 2,000 years, marine life had no value while still alive. For instance, a tuna swimming in the ocean had zero value, and it's only when you kill it and bring it to the market that had value. So with blue carbon, beyond climate action and the other sustainable development goals, the paradigm shift that has been achieved is that for the first time there is investment in repairing and conserving marine ecosystems. So that really changes the conversation from a paradigm that was initiated in the Roman Empire with the Justinian Code that coded the oceans as terra nullius, that is no one's land. And that coding of the ocean as terra nullius is really the predicament that has brought about the depletion of resources in the ocean because it suffers from the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons affects all of that is common, both air, and that leads to the problem of climate change, and also oceans. So for the first time, we have an opportunity to escape the tragedy of the commons that was already identified by Aristotle, but has been with us for 2,000 years because the ocean belonged to no one. And with blue carbon, but moving on to the new concept of blue natural capital, what I and Ralph and our colleagues wish to achieve is to transfer the oceans from being terra nullius to be terra omnis, everybody's land, so that we can all invest in healthy oceans and healthy nature, and that becomes a new asset. So the path from blue carbon to blue natural capital, it's a very important event beyond the climate action because it's the first time that there is value in investing in nature, in the ocean, right? On land, you could own a plot of forest and it has value without you having to log it. But in the ocean, until just a few years ago, the concept of blue carbon, there was really no investment that you could make that was eventually making sense in terms of investing in marine life. So it was only philanthropy that was going into conserving marine life or sometimes public funding, but there was no opportunity to invest in marine life. So blue natural capital is a new asset class, and the challenge is how to turn this new asset class into a new value that can be brought to financial markets, allowing for opportunities for the private sector to invest in marine natural capital, and Ralph is going to tell you how to achieve that. But this is a quote from a friend of mine, James Sterlich, that is the son of the founder of Starwoods Hotels and owner of Starwoods Capital, that he told me once in a vessel in the Bahamas where I was around with some people in the audience, that natural capital is the new real estate. Because in the same way that you can own a building and rent it for many years and derive capital from renting the building, the owners of blue natural capital, which are the nations, the islanders from the Marshall Islands and others, can now derive value from renting the services of the ecosystem, such as climate services. So I mentioned that blue natural capital is the components of ecosystems that support human well-being, and that is not only plants and forests, but also animals can do that, and Ralph will tell us about this. But the important connection here is that no longer we have only one goal, which is a climate goal, but as mentioned earlier, the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework that was agreed by the Convention of Biological Diversity in December last year in Montreal is now referred to as the Paris Agreement for Biodiversity. So it has many important elements, but it has a call to the colleagues in the Climate Convention to activate nature-based solutions to the maximum possible ambition, because nature-based solutions not only contribute to climate action, but they also address the fundamental challenges of biodiversity conservation. And it is not just about 30 by 30. It's also about the ambitious goal of stopping all biodiversity losses by 2030, and also about restoring 30% of degraded ecosystems. Right now, I've been in conversation with different governments around the world. None of them are really translating these goals into the financial resources required or the action required. They're thinking about 30 by 30, that means 30% of protected area, but not what it will take to restore 30% of marine degraded areas. But just for corals alone, that might be $600 billion US that will be required to achieve that goal for one component alone. So it's clear that governments alone cannot do it, and we need the participation of the private sector to invest in nature and be part of the solution on achieving these goals. So I, along with some colleagues, put together a framework 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, in the journal Nature, on a pathway to rebuild marine life, and we pledged that it's possible to restore the abundance of marine life within the time span of one human generation. That is by 2050. That really requires a lot of actions, but we can do it. And it's a grand challenge that is also a very good business opportunity, because we calculate that for every dollar invested in rebuilding marine life, the economic return to markets is $10. And the main beneficiaries will be the insurance sector, the seafood sector, and many others that can really derive benefits from a healthier ocean. And what we need to do is to connect these two major conventions, the Paris Agreement and the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, and the connector between the two is actually natural capital. So natural capital connects our goals on climate and nature. And it also suggests how we need to manage land. We need to have protected areas, this 30%. We need to have heavily densely occupied areas like cities, like Milano. But then we need to also have more nature in areas that we share with nature and makes those areas functional ecosystems. So I submit that what we may see during the 21st century is a paradigm shift, and where planetary repair may be the goal of the fourth industrial revolution, and repairing the planet is probably no longer a cost. It's actually an investment that generates returns and is going to generate jobs that are meaningful jobs, and is going to activate the economy, and the outcome of this will not be a legacy of factories that are abandoned and no longer useful. The legacy of this fourth industrial revolution will be a vibrant nature that is able to support our well-being. Thank you.